Topping the news on this Wednesday, Bill Cosby back in headlines with 5 new women suing the comedian for sexual assault crimes that allegedly occurred during the filming of The Cosby Show. This comes as we wait for a verdict in the Harvey Weinstein rape trial and the Danny Masterson trial gets ready for a retrial. And at the forefront of victim and survivor rights is Caroline Heldman, professor of critical theory and social justice at Occidental College. Caroline regularly joins us as a political analyst, but she is also an expert on coaching survivors of sexual abuse and the author of the new campus anti-rape movement, which led to the MeToo movement. Good morning, Caroline. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Giselle. It's great to see you.
Always great to have you with us. So 2 former actresses on The Cosby Show are among the 5 women suing him for sexual assault in civil court, claiming Cosby misused his power in nefarious, horrific ways. How significant is this suit and how different?
Well, this suit is significant, I think, in 2 primary ways. The first is that it's the first time he's had 5 women in one suit. If you recall, in previous trials, Andrea Constand was the only survivor who was within the statute of limitations. And while we have heard from many former what we call prior bad act witnesses, meaning other women who are reporting similar patterns of behavior, this is the first suit that actually has 5 litigants. I think it's also significant in that the litigants are not just suing Cosby, they're also suing the companies that made the show. They're claiming that these companies enabled this behavior, and that would be Carsey Werner and NBC. And I think perhaps the most significant part of this lawsuit is that 4 out of 5 of these women are Black women. And when you look at the 63 public survivors who have come forward with allegations against Bill Cosby, they're disproportionately Black, meaning that he was targeting Black women. And I think that's a narrative that we simply haven't heard in any of the Cosby cases so far.
Now, this lawsuit was filed under New York's new Adult Survivors Act, which removes the statute of limitations on sexual abuse cases. Does this mean we're going to see a flurry of new lawsuits holding powerful men accountable for past crimes?
Absolutely. In fact, we are already starting to see that. In full disclosure, I worked on passing this law in New York. California has just passed this law as well. It will go into effect next year, right, with the Adult Survivors Act for civil litigation. So these look-back laws open up 1 year for adult survivors of sexual violence to file a claim, even if their case is well outside of the statute of limitations. And I should note, in the state of California, it only goes back to 2009. But yes, in the state of New York, we are starting to see a flurry of cases for folks who weren't able to bring cases because they had simply timed out.
I understand you also have worked with survivors in the Harvey Weinstein rape trial, and we are waiting for a verdict that could come any time now. The jury will have to decide if this was consensual sex. The defense has attempted to discredit these women, pointing to continued conversations they had with Weinstein after the alleged assault. Does that make it difficult to convict?
Well, a New York court convicted Harvey Weinstein on 2 of 5 counts, and he's currently serving a 23-year sentence. So at least one jury has found that that pattern of behavior does not mean that he was not sexually violent. I think it's important to note that all 4 of the Jane Does in the Los Angeles case had contact with him after the fact, especially those who were in the industry. And I just want to point out that this is a norm of the industry. For anyone who works in it, you know that you actually don't have the ability or the freedom to disaffect someone who is so powerful in the industry, because they could affect whether or not your career takes off or doesn't. And in fact, and we have evidence, right? Mira Sorvino came forward and said, my career was essentially stopped after winning an Academy Award because of Harvey Weinstein. So it is a norm in the industry, and the question is whether or not the jury, whether or not the prosecution has done their job in making that case. I will say the defense in Weinstein's case was incredibly good at playing to the jury and playing, I would argue, to rape myths, but certainly conjuring up a lot of emotion around this. So 5th day of deliberations in the Weinstein trial, it's hard to say which way it will go.
And Caroline, you coach survivors, part of your expertise. Talk about the trauma of going to trial and how you best advise women to share these painful stories in a public setting.
That's a great question, Giselle. I think a lot of people don't understand what it takes to be a public survivor. This is a crime against humans that carries a lot of shame. And in fact, I would argue it's the only crime where we really put the victim on trial in stigmatizing ways. And so I coach survivors to maintain their own mental health and essentially put on armor if they're going to be public, because they're going to face a lot of hate mail, a lot of phone calls, a lot of social media buzz about them. Also, when they're going into a trial, they're going to be put on a stand and they're just going to be taken down for hours on end. It's exhausting. If you haven't been to a trial, you could, even if you have truth on your side and you're a really smart person and you're competent and you're sitting there on the stand, you're still going to be ripped to shreds, because that is actually how things work in a court of law. So in the court of public opinion and in the court of law, survivors have a really difficult time maintaining their mental health because they're being re-traumatized and telling their story. And so I help them essentially come up with mechanisms for maintaining their sanity during this process.
Right. And, in many ways, Caroline, you're credited with starting the MeToo movement on college campuses, literally writing the book on it. How would you put into context the progress of the movement since then?
Well, thank you, Giselle. It's definitely a group effort, but just want to do a quick callback to 130 years of activism. Black women started this, and Native American women 130 years ago in the Reconstruction era. And we've seen various peaks of anti-sexual violence work in the United States, mostly driven by women of color. The campus anti-rape movement really laid the groundwork for the Me Too movement, because it raised awareness about the problem and raised awareness about rape myths nearly a decade ago in 2013. And of course, the Me Too movement kind of emerges in 2017, but it was campus activists then empowering and emboldening other survivors to come forward, and the public started to believe survivors. So you see the women of Fox News coming forward and being believed. You saw Cosby survivors coming forward who had come forward a decade earlier and were not believed, but suddenly the public had greater awareness of this. And of course, Weinstein in 2017 and the Me Too movement really breaking wide open. I will say I'm a little pessimistic about the success of the movement. Social movements do two primary things. The first stage is they raise awareness, and the second stage is they put in mechanisms of accountability. And I would say that the movement certainly raised awareness, but we still do not have mechanisms of accountability in place to address the sexual violence epidemic in the United States that sees 1 in 6 girls and women raped over the course of their lifetime.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for bringing your expertise on this issue to us. I'm sure as the verdicts come in, we'll be coming back to you. And of course, we'll see you tomorrow for political analysis. Caroline Heldman, professor of critical theory and social justice at Occidental College, as always. Thank you again for being with us this morning.